A single speech in Davos just triggered the biggest trade war threat between the United States and Canada in modern history. 100% tariffs, Chinese electric cars, and a prime minister who refused to back down. This isn't just diplomacy gone wrong. This is the unraveling of the world's most peaceful border. The clash that's now shaking North America to its core didn't start with economic policy or border disputes. It started with words delivered thousands of miles away on one of the world's most influential stages that cut straight through the carefully maintained diplomatic niceties between two neighboring nations. Last week, at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney stood before an audience of global elites and delivered a speech that would echo far beyond the snowy Alps. His message was pointed, deliberate, and impossible to misinterpret. He criticized the growing trend of powerful countries weaponizing their economic strength, using tariffs not as trade tools but as instruments of coercion, turning financial systems into leverage points and twisting supply chains into nooses around smaller nations' necks. Carney never uttered a single name. He didn't need to. Everyone in that room knew exactly who he was talking about. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was enthusiastic. Leaders from across the globe nodded in agreement, and in Washington, Donald Trump heard every single word. The response from the White House came faster than anyone expected, and it wasn't diplomatic. Within 24 hours, President Trump took to his platform and fired back publicly, addressing Carney by his first name in a tone dripping with condescension. He declared that Canada should be grateful. Grateful for American protection, grateful for American markets, grateful for simply existing next to the United States. Trump made it clear. Canada survives because of us, and its leader better remember that before stepping onto another global stage with criticisms. But Carney didn't flinch. When he finally responded, his words were calm, measured, and unshakable. He stated plainly that Canada does not exist because of the United States. Canada thrives because of its own people, its own resources, and its own identity. That response marked a turning point. The diplomatic gloves were off. Almost immediately, Trump revoked Canada's invitation to what he called the Board of Peace, a symbolic initiative that analysts quickly dismissed as theater. Several European allies had already turned down the invitation, a fact that reportedly irritated Trump even further. Canada had shown little interest in joining anyway, so the move felt less like punishment and more like petulance. But that was just the opening act. What came next sent shockwaves through financial markets, corporate boardrooms, and households across both countries. Trump has now threatened to impose 100% tariffs on every single product Canada exports to the United States. Not selective industries, not strategic sectors. Everything. The justification? Canada's growing trade relationship with China is, well, here's where the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. Just days before Carney's Davos speech and the public fallout that followed, Trump had openly supported limited Canadian engagement with Beijing on specific trade issues. Now, that same cooperation is being framed as a betrayal worthy of the harshest economic retaliation the United States has ever threatened against its northern neighbor. In a recent post on Truth Social, Trump warned that if Canada proceeds with any trade arrangements involving China, the United States would immediately slap a 100% tax on every Canadian export crossing the border. The language was blunt, the threat unmistakable, and the implications, honestly, pretty staggering. But Trump didn't stop there. He repeatedly referred to Prime Minister Carney as Governor Carney, a deliberate insult meant to strip him of sovereign authority and reduce Canada to little more than an American province. He accused Carney of making a catastrophic mistake by opening Canada's economy to Beijing, specifically pointing to a recent agreement that could allow Chinese-made electric vehicles into the Canadian market. Then came the rhetoric that crossed from economic threats into existential warnings. Trump claimed that China would, quote, completely consume Canada, destroying its businesses, eroding its social fabric, and dismantling everything that makes Canada, well, Canada. He insisted that any deal with China would trigger immediate, full-scale tariffs on all Canadian goods, even though the agreement in question is narrow and specific. In a follow-up post, Trump escalated even further, asserting that the world cannot allow China to gain control over Canada, and vowing that such a scenario would never be permitted to happen. The language really suggested he viewed Canada not as a sovereign ally, but as territory within America's sphere of influence. Canada's response was swift and public. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc clarified that Ottawa is not pursuing a comprehensive free trade agreement with China. He explained that recent discussions only resolved a handful of outstanding tariff disputes, technical adjustments, not a geopolitical realignment. The statement was clearly intended to ease tensions and, correct the record. But behind the official reassurances, Canada has already begun charting a new course. Just last week, Canada and China finalized an understanding to ease certain trade restrictions and rebuild strained diplomatic and economic ties. This isn't just paperwork, it's a meaningful shift in Canadian foreign policy and a clear signal that Ottawa is no longer willing to align its trade strategy exclusively with Washington's demands. Prime Minister Carney revealed that China has agreed to reduce tariffs on Canadian rapeseed, commonly known as canola, a major agricultural export. This came after Carney's meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping on January 16th, a historic visit marking the first time in 8 years that a Canadian Prime Minister had traveled to Beijing. As part of the arrangement, Canada agreed to open its market to 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles under a tariff of roughly 6%. That's a dramatic reversal from the 100% surcharge Canada imposed in 2024, a measure introduced specifically to align with American trade policy. In return, China committed to granting Canadian citizens visa-free entry, a symbolic but significant gesture. Shortly after finalizing this deal, Carney appeared at Davos and delivered the speech that ignited this firestorm. His remarks stopped short of naming Trump, but the message was crystal clear. Smaller nations will not be bullied by dominant powers. He criticized the weaponization of tariffs, the manipulation of financial systems, and the exploitation of supply chains, all hallmarks of Trump's trade philosophy. Trump's reaction was immediate and emotional. He accused Canada of failing to appreciate American military protection and insisted that Canada's very survival depends on the United States. Carney rejected that claim outright. Within days, Trump withdrew Canada's invitation to his proposed Board of Peace, despite Carney having previously expressed tentative interest. Trump also alleged that Canada was opposing his so-called Golden Dome missile defense project tied to Greenland, though Ottawa's actual position on the matter remains unclear. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent later said Trump had recently encouraged Canada to participate in the initiative, and Carney has indeed suggested he's open to discussions. Meanwhile, the Canadian government is moving forward with plans to significantly increase defense and security spending, including purchases of advanced fighter jets and submarines, partly in response to Trump's relentless pressure on NATO partners. But despite all the noise, critical questions remain unanswered. What exactly would Trump consider unacceptable? Canada's recent agreement with China is narrowly focused on agriculture and electric vehicles. The White House has declined to comment on it directly. And there's still no clarity on how any escalation in tariffs would function under the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, which currently allows most goods to cross borders duty-free. Certain non-exempt products already face import taxes of up to 35%, along with additional sector-based tariffs on steel, aluminum, and automobiles. Leaders within the auto industry have warned that imposing tariffs on auto parts, one of Canada's largest exports, would quickly disrupt manufacturing operations inside American plants. David Adams, who represents companies that manufacture and sell vehicles in both countries, including Toyota, described Trump's apparent reversal as lacking any rational basis. He cautioned that the consequences would ultimately fall on American workers, consumers, and the broader economy. The economic stakes here are enormous. The United States imports roughly 4 million barrels of Canadian oil every single day to supply refineries across the Midwest. It also relies heavily on Canada for metals, fertilizer, and countless other critical inputs. Disrupting that flow doesn't just hurt Canada, it destabilizes American industry. And here's the thing. Trump has done this before. His threats often fail to materialize. Just a week earlier, he warned European countries of tariffs tied to Greenland, then abandoned the idea. Earlier this month, he floated the possibility of secondary tariffs on nations trading with Iran, including China, without following through. In October, he threatened a 10% tariff on Canadian goods over a television advertisement commissioned by Ontario's government. That proposal went nowhere. Randall Bartlett of Desjardins Group called a 100% tariff on Canada catastrophic, but added that Trump's pattern of issuing dramatic tariff threats and later retreating makes such an outcome unlikely. Still, the damage to bilateral relations is real and deepening. Since Trump's return to the White House, ties between Washington and Ottawa have sharply deteriorated. Newly imposed American tariffs have triggered widespread anger across Canada, leading to boycotts of American products and a noticeable decline in travel to the United States. Canadians are voting with their wallets, and the message is clear. They're done being taken for granted. In response, Canada has moved quickly to reduce its reliance on the United States by deepening trade relationships with Europe and Asia, finalizing the deal with China, and seeking stronger engagement with India. This represents a significant break from the approach of Carney's predecessor, Justin Trudeau, whom Trump frequently mocked as Governor Trudeau, a taunt that faded when Carney took office. But with the renewed escalation of trade war rhetoric, tensions are once again at the forefront. What's unfolding between the United States and Canada isn't just a trade dispute. It's a test of sovereignty, a fracture in one of the world's most stable alliances, and a warning about what happens when economic power is wielded as a weapon instead of a tool for mutual benefit. Whether Trump's threats become reality or fade like so many before them, one thing is certain: the relationship between these two nations will never quite be the same. And the world is watching closely to see which path North America chooses next.